Hi everyone. In this lesson, we'll take a little break from programming. I'm going to tell you about game effects. We'll start with a little theory, then create the effects of dust under the character's feet and a crumbling wall. We'll also download an asset with effects from the store. Before we practice, I'll explain some concepts to you. First, I'll tell you how to create effects using a particle system. We'll talk about its settings. As a result, we'll create dust under the character's feet. You don't always have to create effects yourself. Some effects, sounds, and 3D models can be downloaded from the store. Unity has an asset store, where you can find many assets that are ready for use in the engine. I'll show you how to download them, using an effect pack as an example, and we'll use it in the game. Let's create a new particle system. Click Game Object, Effects, Particle System. This is what it looks like by default. These are the standard settings. Let's move it somewhere closer. I think the best way to tell you about the particle system is by using several concrete examples. Let's start with the following effect. So the character runs, and there are cartoon-like things under their feet. What would you call it? Dust or something? I think it's dust. It's made of spheres that grow bigger, then gradually grow smaller, and disappear. This is what the particle system initially looks like. By the way, we didn't pay much attention to this before, but when you select objects, they're highlighted orange. When working with particles, this may be inconvenient, because it distracts you from the visuals. You can't fully see whether it looks nice or not. Here you can temporarily turn this thing off, Selection Outline. But don't forget to turn it on later, or don't be surprised if you can't select anything. It's a feature of the particle system. There are quite a lot of different items and sections. Most options are disabled here. We'll look at some of them now. Let's start with the Shapes section. Here, you can select the shape that the particles fly out from. By default, it's a cone. It suits us for now, but you can check out what else there is. For example, a sphere. The particles come from different parts of the sphere and fly out in all directions. But the cone is good. It has a definite direction. Here, you can set the cone angle and radius. We'll make the particles fly out of a small dot. Later, we'll attach this particle system to the character's feet. The particles will fly out when the character moves. I'll explain later. This section concerns the shape of the emitter, that is, the thing that the particles fly out of. This is the main section, which contains the parameters that you'd expect to see here. First of all, there's the looping option. Let me tell you about it. If looping is on, the system generates particles infinitely. If you turn it off, the particles will be created only for this amount of time, the duration. For example, let's type 1. A window appears where you can reproduce the particle system. If I click play, it starts to be reproduced. The particles are created for 1 second only. You can click stop or pause. These buttons are usually all you need. In this case, we enable looping. The duration will have no meaning here, but let's just not touch it. Now let's look at lifetime. The start lifetime parameter. The particles fly for a while and are destroyed at some point. Around here. Now they live for 5 seconds. You can decrease the parameter value. For example, set it to 1 second, and the particles will exist a much shorter time. Almost all these parameters can be set up randomly. Here's an arrow where you can select the random between two constants option and specify a range of random numbers. I selected the wrong parameter. I wanted to set start lifetime. Let's say the particles will live from half a second to 2 seconds. So some particles fly far away, and others die in half a second. You can set up any parameters in this way. For example, start speed, from 0 to 5 meters per second. They all have different speeds. Let's select something suitable. Probably from 1. Or from 3 to 4, something like that. Now the particle starts size. This is clear. It's about how big they are. You can set the particle color. Another interesting thing is gravity modifier. It's needed quite often. We're adding gravity. The particles don't just fly endlessly in space, they gravitate downwards. It's important to add that now. We can probably put one here. I think it'll be nice. Like that. The next important parameter is simulation space. It's set to local by default. Look how the particle system behaves when I move it. It just moves as a whole together with all the particles that have already been created. But if you select World, this is how it will happen. That is, the newly created particles live in the world space. So, it looks more realistic. Let's select World. There's also the simulation speed parameter, which can speed up everything in general, like this. I probably won't touch it now. And these are all the parameters from this section that I wanted to show you for this example. Let's make the radius a little smaller. But it doesn't look like I want it yet, because the particles look like large spheres. Let's look at the renderer section at the bottom. Here you can set the shape of every individual particle. Render mode is set to billboard by default. What does that mean? Every particle just turns to the camera. By the way, you can click pause and look at it in this mode. Select shaded wireframe here. As you can see, the particles are actually little squares with a picture. And they focus on the camera. In fact, everything that we see on the screen in Unity is geometry, polygons with different textures, materials, and shaders. Particles are no exception. Okay, let's change it back. You can also select other display options, for example, mesh. There. It looks a little strange now, but the particle's shape is a cube. They're cubes. In addition to shape, you also need to configure render alignment. They are now aligned by view, that is, by appearance. Even though it's a cube, it always turns to us with the same side, and it looks strange. You can select World. The cubes will look like this. But they also have this blurred circle texture. Let's create a new material for the particles. We go to Materials and call this new material Dust. Something like that. In fact, the standard material that we use is Universal Render Pipeline/lit. This shader is suitable for particles. It'll be assigned to them and will work correctly. So let's see. You need to drag the material in this field. You can set shades, highlights, and reflections. That's good. The only thing that this material can't do is react to color. We want to set the particle color, but this shader doesn't care at all. Because of that, it's better to use a different shader for particles. Here at the top, select Universal Render Pipeline and the Particles section. There are several shader options. Lit means illuminated. That is, it reacts to light. Simple Lit is a simpler shader, it just has fewer settings. You can experiment. Unlit means not illuminated. If you just want to create smoke or sparks, you don't need the particles to be illuminated by the sun. So you can select Unlit. Let's select Lit. These are the settings, they're quite simple. You can adjust metallic map, emission, and color. Note that the start color is taken into account now. By the way, you can set start color to random between two colors. For example, from white to gray. The shades are a little different here. Okay, but we need spheres rather than cubes. Here in the Meshes section, you can select spheres. They're huge now, they must be much smaller, so I'll reduce the start size parameter. Again, you can adjust it to make them different. Make the start size random as well. Let's say from 0.2 to 0.3. No, from 0.15. You can experiment with different values and get some interesting results. What else can we do? I'd like there to be more particles, and they fly down too far now. They could have disappeared here already. Let's set the lifetime to 0.5 to 0.8. They also disappear abruptly. You can adjust this as well. Here's the size over lifetime parameter. Its particle size during its lifetime. You set it up using a graph. Click this graph, and it opens here for editing. We can configure it like this. Let's say they're small in the beginning. If you double-click, a new point is added. Then they grow, but they shrink again and eventually just disappear. It's an interesting effect. Here are also the color over lifetime parameters. You can make the particles red in the beginning and turn them blue at the end. These are pretty simple parameters. You can click around and try different settings. I think you'll understand them immediately when you play with them. There's also the emission section. Here, you can increase the number of particles, for example, to 30. I think this is quite interesting, although it's still too much. What else? You can spend a long time playing with the settings here. The particles look a little too dark to me. We can enable emission and increase brightness. They must be bright and cartoon-like, so that their volume is barely visible. Now everything is ready, and we can add it to our character. The only thing that still bothers me is that the particles are now generated all the time, regardless of whether the character is running or standing still. In the Emission tab, you can set the rate over time and rate over distance properties of the particle system. The latter means the number of particles depending on the distance. If you enter a number, the particles will be generated like this when the character passes a certain distance. This suits us best right now. Now we'll attach these particles to the player. We'll move them to player just like that and put them in the 0, 0 position so that they're right at the character's feet. You can add some more settings to make it look nicer, but I think you get the idea. There's the result. It's not too bad. Let's set up another particle system. I want these brick walls to crumble into small bricks. That is, when the object disappears, a particle system that looks like small bricks flies out. By the way, there's an image of a brick wall attached under the video. To make it easier to test, you can add it to the project. Just to make the object look nicer. The particles will be without any texture. I'll assign it like that. You can actually download any brick texture from the internet. I'll create a new particle system. Game object, effects, particle system. Let's start by making these objects have a brick-like shape. You already know that you need to select mesh. Select the cubic shape and create a new material again. I'll call it brick. Drag the material on the particle system, select world, and set the color of the material right away. That's not bad. Now we'll adjust the particle speed and the shape that they fly out of. So, let's set up the shape first. In the shape section here, the cone is no longer suitable. It doesn't look like what the bricks will fly out of. Let's select box. By adjusting the box dimensions, we change where the particles fly from. I want to place this particle system exactly in the curb position. Let's do it this way. We'll take particle system and put it in barrier as a child object. Set the position to 0, 0, 0, and then we can disconnect it again. What matters is that it's right at this point. As a result, when the curb is destroyed, a new object will be created in its place, a particle system. We'll program this at the end of the lesson. It looks weird now. Let's turn it around to make the particles fly in that direction. I'll change the size of this shape to fit the curb size. And then I need to change the brick size, because they're huge now. Start size. You can also select the 3D start size option, because the bricks aren't exactly cubes, and this option allows you to set up some interesting proportions. I'll also reduce the start speed, because it's too fast to even see the bricks. Not bad. One more thing. I want these bricks to be created just once. Right now they're being generated infinitely. So we'll disable the looping check mark and set rate over time to 0. Another way to generate particles by using the burst section. Click the plus icon and enter the number of particles, which is how many bricks we want in total, for example, 100. Then click play and see what happens. 100 bricks are created right away. I think it's not bad. Except there has to be gravity. So we set the gravity modifier to 1, the speed must be higher, and the lifetime shorter. Here's the result. Now they all fly together as one, so let's give them different speeds. The start speed can be random, from 5 to 7, or something like that. Now it's more interesting. And one more thing. You can actually probably turn this particle system so that they fly up a little. It will also be fun if they rotate while flying. You can use the following setting. Rotation over lifetime. This can be a random value. You also need to select this option to make the particle rotation speed vary a lot. From -100 to 100. Along every axis. Let's see. That's not bad, right? You can already see they rotate randomly. 200 is probably better. It'll make it look even more dynamic. It will also be fun to make the bricks collide with the floor. Now they just fly right through. You can use the collision option here. Actually, let's not rotate the particle system. I'll set this to 0. That'll make it easier to work with. So how does collision work? You can select what the particles will collide with. Because there are a lot of particles, optimization is a big deal for all of these settings. By default, we don't usually make particles collide with all objects in the scene, because it may be unproductive. The best option is the planes type. It makes the particles only collide with certain planes. Mathematically, it's quite quick and simple to calculate how a sphere intersects with a plane. Here, you need to click the plus icon and add an empty object. Just create an empty object. We can call it plane, but it's actually just a point. Then we need to specify this point in the particle system here. Add it here. Select Visualize Bounds. If you click play, you can see that the particles collide with this plane, as it were. That is, the point belongs to this plane. We just need to raise it to this level. That's the plane, and that's how the bricks fly. Let's make it look nicer again. First of all, now the bricks disappear abruptly. Secondly, they bounce off the plane too much, so let's reduce bounce in the collision settings. For example, like that. Let them still bounce a little. There's also the lifetime loss parameter. Loss is a percentage of the brick lifetime that's lost when the bricks hit the floor. Like that. They collide, and that makes them disappear faster. We can also reduce the size of the bricks over time. Let's go back to size over lifetime and create a graph that hits 0 in the end. Something like that. That's not very realistic, but at least the bricks don't twitch in a weird way. The plane is a little distracting. You can collapse the collision tab, and the plane will disappear. Something else is missing, in my opinion. It's not bad, and you can play with the settings some more. I'd like to make the brick speed a little higher and a little more varied, so that they fly apart like that. And they all disappear at the same time, which looks strange, so we'll give them different lifetimes as well. From 0.6 to 1.3. Something like that. Finally, let's make this effect work when the curb is destroyed. That's very easy. Let's give this particle system a name like Bricks Effect, and add it to the prefabs. Then you can remove this object from the scene. When the curb is destroyed, I want to create this effect at the same place where the curb was. We already have the curb script. We've already written how it must be destroyed. Here's what we need to do now. Add a link to the prefab that we need to create. Add a field of the game object type here, and call it Bricks Effect Prefab. Oddly enough, this hasn't been mentioned in the course yet. To create objects, you can use the instantiate method. It creates a new object. First, you need to specify which object to create. Bricks Effect Prefab. Use a comma to indicate the position where it must be created. Transform.position, that is, the current position of the curb. Then indicate how it must be rotated. In the same way as the curb, transform.rotation. End with a semicolon. There are more parameters here. For example, you can specify the parent of this object right away, and it'll attach to it. In general, methods often have different sets of parameters, not the same ones. You can view them by clicking these arrows. There, you can just specify what to create, and what the parent is, or you can also specify the position and rotation like we just did. You need to choose which option suits you better. But now we've set the object, position, and rotation. That's basically it. Now we need to assign the prefab to the curb. The curbs themselves aren't prefabs, they're just saved in the finished prefab. So let's just select every curb separately, like this. Or rather, select them all and drag the effect here. That's it. Apply all the changes to the finish, and let's see the result. That's it. The curbs are destroyed. And bricks fly. Interestingly, the bricks don't hit the floor plane now. And here's another thing to pay attention to. Look, I created this plane, right? I did it in a rather strange way. So we added the brick prefab in the folder. Here it is. But when I created these particles, I added a link to a certain plane in the collision. This plane is here in the scene, but it isn't in the prefab. So the link disappeared from here, and there's no plane. We've already seen this in the course once. Here's one thing you can do. Take this plane, or rather, the point that functions as the center of the plane. Put it inside the effect, and then move it here. Now we can apply the changes to the prefab. The plane will be in it, and the particles will find it. Great, we'll play it again and see how the bricks fall, but let's do something else first. I think you've realized that you can have fun with the particle system settings and achieve different results, but it takes a rather long time, right? Sometimes you can download ready-made effects from the internet. Unity has an asset store. Let's open it and download an effect library. Just type Asset Store in the search and open it. That's what it looks like. There are different categories here: 3D objects, 2D objects, sounds, and different instruments. We need the VFX category, Visual Effects. On the right, you select all the categories that you're looking for. I need particles, so I select this. You can also specify the price. They can be very expensive, cheap, or even free. You can select free assets to only browse the free ones. There are quite good free effects here and libraries that you can use in the project. Games often have things like coin collection, explosion, or impact effects. This package is quite suitable. It has some universal effects. Click it and press the Add to My Assets button. Agree with everything here. If you aren't registered here or if you aren't logged into Unity, you'll need to enter your Unity ID. Click Open in Unity and open here. The Package Manager window opens. But the connection with the browser didn't work. You can open Package Manager from here. There are several sections here. Select My Assets here, and you'll see all the libraries and all the assets that you downloaded or bought from Asset Store. They'll all be listed here. Then press the Download button to download the effects to your computer. When they're downloaded, click Import to import them to the project. A window opens where you can select what to import and what not to import, but most likely, you need everything. Click Import. Some more windows have opened. Close them all. There's a new JMO Assets folder in the project now. There are different effects in it, so let's take a look. You can double-click the prefab like this. The effects are here. They can be organized in different ways. Here, it's done with prefabs, and that's how it's usually done. For example, This is fire. Here's light. There are several categories here, 3, 4, 5. And there's a different number of effects in the categories. Now I want to find an effect for a coin. What happens when we collect a coin? Something abstract has to happen. Like some sparkles. This looks pretty good, I think. Just stars and circles. Since we've decided to use this effect, so we don't lost it, we can drag it to our prefabs folder. Or whatever you think is convenient. This is what I usually do. Then we'll create the effect of a coin being destroyed. It's the same as with the curbs. This is where the coin is destroyed in the coin script. We'll add a link to the prefab, to the effect. GameObject_effect prefab. We'll create it using the instantiate method, too. Select transform.position. And it really doesn't matter how it's rotated. Let it be the same as the coin, transform.rotation. That's it. Now all that remains is to put it on the coin. Let's select the coin prefab here and drag the effect in the prefab field. It may be too big now. Let's see what it looks like. The character starts running. So it looks like this now. I also want to note that this effect consists of multiple effects. You may have one particle system with multiple systems embedded in it. This way, you can create more complex effects. You already know how particle systems work, so if you want to adjust anything here, you can do it yourself. I'll just say that the effect is kind of grayish now, because for some reason the shader is configured in this way. If you make it white, it gets much brighter. Of course, you sometimes have to edit these effects a little bit to suit your needs. Let's summarize. The particle system has a lot of settings that you can use to achieve completely different effects. Some effects are looped and played endlessly. You need to select the looping option for that. Other effects are played once and then disappear. It's convenient to make the effects that are played once into prefabs and use the instantiate method to create them at the right moment in the game.